Look in your closet. Your favorite blue jeans are the product of more than a century of continuous innovation and improvement. Today, you can get your jeans in all kinds of denim colors, but the classic pair of dungarees will always be blue. This is the story of the blue in your blue jeans.
It's almost like a wearable canvas that tells the story of whatever the person did, the lifestyle of the person. So the garment itself can tell a story just by observing where the wear patterns form. And indigo, because it is not a soluble dye, it sits on the exterior of the yarn. And that is why when that color chips off, you get the variations of blue.
Blue jeans are made from a fabric called denim, and denim basically consists of two ingredients, cotton and indigo dye. The cotton is spun into yarn. The yarn is dyed with indigo, and then the dyed yarn is woven into a sturdy fabric. The fabric is cut and sewn into blue jeans.
People all around the world using different plants figured out how to make indigo dye. They figured it out in Europe using a plant called woad. They figured it out in India, which is where we get the word indigo. They figured it out throughout Africa. They figured it out in Japan. They figured it out in Southeast Asia. And they figured it out in the Americas.
Chemists found a way to synthetically make indigo without plants. In the 20th century, the denim industry entirely shifted away from natural to synthetic indigo dye in just a few years. That was when Cone Mills, the owner of the White Oak Cotton Mill in Greensboro, really took off.
The first person to create synthetic indigo was a man named Adolf von Baer, who did so in 1897. And von Baer's invention really changed the world. And one of the big effects was on British India. In 1895, British India exported 9,000 tons of indigo, and that was the peak because 2 years later, Adolf von Baer invented synthetic indigo, and it swept away the demand for plant-based indigo.
Only a few mills made denim fabric. One of them was White Oak. The White Oak Mill became very busy. Thousands of strands of yarn were wound into thicker ropes, then washed in a boiling detergent, dipped into large vats of indigo dye, washed again, and each time squeezed and wound into a damp ball. One problem with this method was that the indigo dye coats the yarn unevenly, and the chemical oxidation in the air that needs to happen is also uneven.
The previous method was to do it in separate steps. The patent talks about trucking the yarn from one area to another, yarn balls, and each time they need to unwind and rewind. Yarn breaks. So not only was there a lot of excessive floor space used, they had to stop and tie the broken ends together. People were making use of rollers, pinch rollers, feed rollers, all over to be able to have a long process to only unwind once, treat the product, treat it again, dry the product, oxidize the product, and then rewind it again in one step. This process shown in the Touchstone patent solved a lot of problems ongoing in the industry. One of the primary problems it solved was inconsistent dye strength. So much time is taken in this patent describing the process where you can constantly replenish the dye bath, because once you put some dye on some yarn, that dye bath is weaker than it was before you went through a dye cycle. The Touchstone patent shows in the textile industry a way to condense processes into a constant flow assembly line, so to speak, that brought together all these separate steps into one line for tremendous efficiencies and consistency of product.
A person who masters the dyeing process, a dye master, is like a kitchen chef. They might even touch, taste, smell the dye batches just to make sure the mix is right.
I'm a designer, Wrangler, Contour, which has both Wrangler and Lee. We tend to cut from each specific roll, each lot, so we can have that shade consistency. But even as you go from roll to roll, you still want to have tolerance, right? Just how much it skews one way or the other. So the dye master is crucial in that aspect. To control that consistency is very, very difficult.
Today, we owe our deep blue jeans to dye master Floyd Virgil Hayes of the White Oak Cotton Mill. Floyd gained employment at the White Oak Mill sometime around 1925. Hayes found himself in the dye house where he made dye liquor for the indigo vats during his shift. Eventually, through trial and error, he perfected the recipe. When they ran out of dye liquor, someone would get him at his home so he could keep the dye boxes filled and cranking out deep-tone blue yarn.
When I saw the exhibit, immediately I was drawn to the picture of Mr. Hayes. And interestingly enough, I was drawn to it because after being in this industry for 20 years, one of the things that was always with me, it wasn't the focus, but it was always present, was I didn't see people that looked like me in its history. What was also interesting about reading about him and the fact that he was able to not only understand when a dye bath was ready, but that he couldn't really tell you how he knew. I just felt inside of me that it was one of those ancestral things, where it just passed on to him, and he just happened to find himself in the environment that brought forth that which was in him out to say, well, I know this. I don't know how I know this, but I know this.
Today, continuous innovation and improvement is still needed in the making of blue jeans.
In 1897, BASF introduced the synthetic variety that we use today. The process of putting it on the yarn is pretty damaging to the environment because it produces so much polluted water or water that needs to be treated. Today, we're looking forward to new processes that can eliminate the water discharge, eliminate a lot of the chemistry, and we're also looking at going back to plant indigo instead of synthetic indigo. So if we can implement a new way of dyeing, then we can improve the environmental footprint of the overall supply chain. And all this work is happening right here in Greensboro.